The world's stability hinges on many complex and interconnected issues, from economic competition to climate change and shifting alliances. Yet few issues are as volatile or as likely to spark global consequences as the status of Taiwan. Just 100 miles from China's coast, Taiwan sits at the heart of a decades-long geopolitical standoff, its fate watched closely by the world's most powerful nations. Here, history, national identity, and international law collide, creating a puzzle that has defied resolution for over 75 years and shaped the destinies of millions. The question of Taiwan's sovereignty is where American and Chinese power directly clash, with both sides unwilling to compromise on what they see as core interests. This isn't just a dispute between two governments, it's a conflict rooted in the aftermath of World War II, the bitter legacy of the Chinese Civil War, and decades of Cold War diplomacy that shaped the modern world order. To understand why Taiwan commands such global attention, we must peel back the layers of history and examine the ambiguous international agreements, shifting alliances, and unresolved questions that followed the war's end. At its core, the issue is a fundamental disagreement over sovereignty. Beijing sees Taiwan as a breakaway province that must eventually be reunified, while Taiwan has evolved into a vibrant democracy with its own government, society, and unique identity. These narratives are mutually exclusive, and as each side grows more entrenched, the divide only grows wider, fueling tension and uncertainty across the region. This is not just a local quarrel, it's a clash of political systems, ideologies, and national identities, with democracy and authoritarianism standing in stark opposition. The story of Taiwan is in many ways the story of our modern world, a microcosm of the struggles, hopes, and challenges that define the 21st century. To grasp Taiwan's present, we must look to its past. Once a peripheral part of the Chinese Empire, Taiwan was ceded to Japan in 1895 after China's defeat in the First Sino-Japanese War. For 50 years, Taiwan was a Japanese colony, developing a distinct identity and modern infrastructure. Japanese rule left deep marks on the island's culture and economy, setting it apart from the mainland. In 1945, with Japan's defeat, the Republic of China took control of Taiwan, initially welcomed as liberators. But optimism faded as the KMT's rule brought corruption, repression, and tension with the local population. The tragic 1947 2/28 incident, where thousands of Taiwanese were killed by KMT forces, deepened mistrust and fostered a unique Taiwanese identity. The KMT, preoccupied with civil war on the mainland, treated Taiwan as a resource, not a home. This legacy of trauma and division still shapes Taiwan's sense of self today. In 1943, as World War II raged on, the leaders of the Allied powers gathered in Cairo, Egypt, for a pivotal meeting that would shape the future of East Asia. Their goal was to discuss not only how to defeat Japan, but also to plan the post-war world and determine the fate of territories occupied by Japan. The result was the Cairo Declaration, a statement that declared territories seized by Japan, including Taiwan, should be restored to China, signaling a major shift in regional power. Today, Beijing points to this declaration as a foundational document, arguing it represents a binding promise by the world's great powers to return Taiwan to China's control. However, it's important to note that the declaration was issued as a press communiqué, not as a formal, legally binding treaty. Many legal scholars and critics argue that the Cairo Declaration was more a statement of intent than an actual legal transfer of sovereignty, lacking the force of international law. According to this view, a real and lasting transfer of territory would require a formal peace treaty, signed and ratified by all relevant parties. This distinction is crucial. Was the Cairo Declaration a binding international act, or simply a political statement made in the heat of war? Supporters of Taiwan's self-determination emphasize that the declaration's non-binding nature means it cannot decide Taiwan's future, and that the people of Taiwan should have a say in their own destiny. They argue that intentions and wartime promises alone did not and could not finalize Taiwan's legal status on the world stage. For them, the final word on Taiwan's status would have to come later, through a formal peace treaty with Japan, such as the San Francisco Peace Treaty, which notably left Taiwan's fate unresolved. This unresolved question, who truly has sovereignty over Taiwan, remains at the very heart of the ongoing dispute between China, Taiwan, and the international community. The ambiguity left by the Cairo Declaration set the stage for decades of tension, debate, and contention that continue to shape the region's politics to this day. In 1945, Allied leaders met again in Potsdam, issuing an ultimatum to Japan. The Potsdam Proclamation referenced Cairo, stating its terms would be carried out. When Japan surrendered, it accepted these terms, which Beijing argues sealed Taiwan's return to China. This sequence, Cairo's promise, Potsdam's reinforcement, Japan's acceptance, forms the backbone of Beijing's legal claim. However, skeptics note that both Cairo and Potsdam were statements of intent, not formal treaties. International law typically requires a formal peace treaty to transfer territory. The Potsdam Proclamation set the stage for such a treaty, but was not the treaty itself. The legal ambiguity persisted, leaving Taiwan's fate unresolved. This ambiguity would become central in the next decisive agreement. The world was left waiting for a final binding settlement. The 1951 Treaty of San Francisco officially ended the war between Japan and the Allies, marking a pivotal moment in post-war history. This treaty was meant to bring closure to years of conflict and reshape the political landscape of East Asia. In the treaty, Japan renounced all claims to Taiwan, relinquishing its hold over the island after decades of colonial rule. However, the treaty did not specify to whom sovereignty over Taiwan should be transferred, leaving a crucial detail unresolved. This omission was not accidental. It was a deliberate ambiguity, reflecting the deep divisions of the Cold War era, when the world was split between the influence of the United States and the Soviet Union, and there was no consensus on which Chinese government was legitimate. Neither the People's Republic of China nor the Republic of China was invited to sign the treaty, leaving both governments excluded from this crucial decision-making process. Supporters of Taiwanese self-determination argue that since the treaty didn't award Taiwan to any specific country, its legal status remains undetermined to this day, fueling ongoing debates about the island's future. They claim that, under the principle of self-determination, sovereignty should reside with the people of Taiwan themselves, who have developed a distinct identity and democratic society over the decades. The Republic of China's presence on the island is often seen by some as that of an occupying power, never having been granted formal legal title by the international community, further complicating the issue. This interpretation directly challenges the narrative that the wartime Cairo and Potsdam conferences had already settled Taiwan's fate, suggesting instead that those agreements were not legally binding on the island's status. Instead, the San Francisco Treaty's silence on the matter leaves the question of Taiwan's sovereignty open and unresolved, a blank space in international law that persists. This ambiguity has allowed both the PRC and the ROC to maintain their competing claims over Taiwan, each asserting legitimacy in the absence of a definitive legal settlement. The world's major powers, faced with a complex and sensitive issue, ultimately chose ambiguity over clarity, and the consequences of that decision continue to shape international relations and regional stability. Today, Taiwan's status remains one of the world's great unresolved questions, a source of tension and debate that endures in global politics and in the lives of the island's people. Beijing's position is unwavering. There is only one China, and Taiwan is an inseparable part of it. The PRC claims to be the sole legitimate government of all China, including Taiwan. Beijing cites centuries of Chinese administration and the Cairo and Potsdam declarations as proof of its claim. The PRC dismisses the San Francisco Treaty's ambiguity, arguing the matter was already settled. Reunification is framed as a sacred mission central to China's national identity and President Xi Jinping's vision. Beijing uses economic and diplomatic power to enforce this view globally, pressuring others to treat Taiwan as a province. China has never renounced the use of force, backing its claim with military modernization and legal threats. For Beijing, the question is not if, but when and how Taiwan will be unified. Taipei's perspective has evolved dramatically. Initially, the ROC claimed to be the sole legitimate government of all China, mirroring Beijing's stance. But democratization in the 1980s and 90s fostered a distinct Taiwanese identity. Today, many in Taiwan see themselves as citizens of a sovereign, democratic state, separate from the mainland. The PRC has never ruled Taiwan, and the island's political system, freedoms, and values are fundamentally different. Most Taiwanese support maintaining the status quo de facto independence without a formal declaration. This pragmatic approach avoids provoking Beijing while preserving Taiwan's democracy. The government in Taipei argues there's no need to declare independence. They already function as a sovereign state. The challenge is to preserve this reality amid growing pressure from China. Taiwan's path is one of resilience, democracy, and careful navigation of existential risks. Taiwan's status is a global flashpoint, with the potential to trigger conflict between the US and China. The US maintains strategic ambiguity, supplying Taiwan with defensive arms but not guaranteeing intervention. A conflict would devastate the global economy, as Taiwan is the world's leading producer of advanced semiconductors. Disruption of these supply chains would trigger a global recession. The dispute is also a test of the international order, democracy and self-determination versus authoritarian power and territorial integrity. Many nations are caught between economic ties to China and support for democratic values. The struggle over Taiwan shapes alliances, military strategies, and economic policies worldwide. The outcome will define the global balance of power for decades. The world watches, knowing the stakes could not be higher. Taiwan's story is a microcosm of modern geopolitics, an unresolved puzzle shaped by war, diplomacy, and identity. Beijing sees a renegade province, Taipei sees a sovereign democracy. The positions are irreconcilable, leaving the world in a delicate balance. US policy of strategic ambiguity has kept the peace, but rising tensions cast doubt on its durability. The future is uncertain. Can the status quo hold, or will one side force a resolution? The world's ability to manage this conflict will shape the century ahead. The stakes are immense, not just for Taiwan, but for global peace and order. The final chapter remains unwritten, and its outcome will echo for generations.